There are moments in life when the absence of someone speaks more profoundly than their presence ever could. When a good man walks out of a woman's life, there is no dramatic collapse, no storm, no chaos. Instead, there is a quiet, a stillness, a silence that was never there before. And that silence carries a truth, one she may not have wanted to hear, but one she can no longer avoid. It is the truth of what he brought into her life, and what is left behind now that he is gone. Silence as a mirror becomes one of the most powerful emotional experiences after losing someone who offered stability, warmth, and consistent presence. When a good man walks away, the initial reaction may not be explosive or dramatic. Instead, it unfolds slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. Yet that quiet begins to reveal truths that were once drowned out by routine, assumptions, or the belief that he would always be there. Silence has a way of amplifying what was previously ignored. It exposes the small acts of care that once blended into the background, the messages he sent to check in, the way he listened when she spoke, the patience he brought to moments of tension, the emotional safety he provided without announcing it. These moments, taken for granted or overlooked, begin to surface again in her memory, but now they echo inside a space he no longer occupies. Without him, that space feels colder, more hollow, and it forces her to confront the absence of what once filled it. This silence doesn't just reflect him, it reflects her. It reveals the ways she may have dismissed his needs, minimized his feelings, or assumed his devotion made him unbreakable. It highlights the times she prioritized pride over understanding, or independence over connection, believing that pushing him away would never truly move him. But silence has a way of removing illusions. It strips away the noise of excuses and forces her to see her behavior without defense or distortion. Every moment she ignored his emotional fatigue, every gesture she brushed off, every boundary he whispered instead of demanded, these fragments come back, illuminated by the quiet that remains. The mirror of silence also reveals how he maintained the emotional rhythm of the relationship, often without recognition. Without him, the balance shifts. The text messages stop, the reassurance stops, the warmth stops. The predictability she once criticized now becomes something she misses. His absence becomes an unexpected teacher, showing her how much emotional labor he carried, how much gentleness he offered, how much structure he provided simply by showing up consistently. As days unfold, the silence grows heavier because it holds both memory and consequence. It becomes a space where she can no longer hide behind distraction or blame. Instead, she must face the reality that losing a good man is not just about missing who he was, but realizing who she was with him and who she wasn't. In this way, silence becomes not only a reflection, but a reckoning, an invitation to acknowledge the truth she once avoided. An emotional landscape she must now navigate alone. Emotional accountability begins to surface in ways she never expected once a good man is no longer there to cushion the emotional distance within the relationship. His presence, once steady and reliable, created an emotional framework she became accustomed to. He was often the one who initiated difficult conversations, soothed conflicts, offered clarity when things felt overwhelming, and carried the responsibility of keeping the relationship emotionally connected. But when he leaves, that structure collapses, and suddenly she is confronted with the reality of how much of the emotional effort he invested without acknowledgement. She starts to see moments where he reached out, not just physically, but with vulnerability, sharing his fears, expressing his needs, revealing his hopes for the relationship, only to be met at times with indifference, defensiveness, or dismissal. Now, in the quiet aftermath, those moments replay in her mind with painful clarity, reminding her of how often she overlooked the emotional labor he contributed. The absence of his presence exposes the imbalance that existed, forcing her to examine the ways she may have relied on his empathy without offering her own. She begins to recognize how easily she expected him to understand her moods, her silences, her frustrations, while she rarely asked about the weight he carried. Emotional accountability means acknowledging the times she took his patience for granted, assuming it was endless because he rarely complained. It also means admitting that his calmness was often misunderstood as simplicity, rather than the careful intention it required to maintain harmony. She realizes that while she demanded emotional depth from him, she did not always provide a space for his own depth to be seen or valued. In this new silence, She is left without the reassurance he once gave so effortlessly. There is no one to decode her emotions, no one stepping in to bridge the gap during misunderstandings, no one offering stability when she becomes overwhelmed. And this shift compels her to face her own emotional patterns without the buffer of his support. Emotional accountability becomes the recognition of her role in the erosion of the connection, the understanding that love cannot be sustained by one person doing the emotional heavy lifting. It is the process of seeing how her reactions, her avoidance, or her inability to reciprocate emotional care contributed to the widening distance between them. As she reflects, she begins to grasp that a good man's love is not simply a benefit but a responsibility, one that requires awareness, reciprocity, and conscious effort. The silence forces her to confront the reality that his emotional presence was not guaranteed but earned through his commitment, and that losing it means accepting the part she played in allowing that connection to fade. The echo of missed intimacy is often the most haunting part of losing a good man because it lingers in moments she never expected to feel empty. Intimacy is not just romance or closeness, it is the subtle emotional thread woven through shared routines, quiet conversations, gentle reassurances, and the comfort of knowing someone sees you even when you struggle to see yourself. When he was there, these moments felt ordinary, almost invisible in their simplicity. Yet after he's gone, those same moments return in echoes, sharp, vivid, and unavoidably honest. She begins to feel the weight of his absence in the smallest details, the unreturned laughter in the room where they once joked, the coldness of the bed where warmth used to settle, the silence during meals that were once filled with easy conversation. These echoes are not loud, they're soft, but piercing enough to remind her of what intimacy once felt like when it was nurtured consistently by someone who cared deeply. These missed moments take on a new meaning because they reflect what she once had but didn't fully recognize. She starts to recall how he listened, not just to her words but to the emotions behind them, how he noticed when she was overwhelmed, how he reached for her hand without needing a reason. She remembers his presence during the quiet evenings when he sat beside her, sharing space without forcing conversation, creating a sense of belonging she didn't realize was rare. Now that he is gone, those memories become more than nostalgia, they turn into reminders of the emotional closeness she once experienced but didn't prioritize. Intimacy, she begins to understand, is built through attention, appreciation, and mutual effort, things he offered consistently, even when it went unacknowledged. The echo grows louder in moments where she needs comfort or connection but finds no one who understands her in the same way he did. She realizes how deeply he learned her habits, her triggers, her insecurities, and how patiently he navigated them. Without him, she faces the truth that genuine intimacy requires vulnerability, and she may not have allowed herself to match the openness he offered. She starts to see how often he reached out to maintain closeness through questions, gestures, and subtle emotional invitations that she sometimes ignored, brushed aside, or responded to half-heartedly. Those missed opportunities now return as echoes, reminding her of the closeness that slowly faded because she didn't nurture it alongside him. These echoes do not simply cause regret, they create a profound awareness of what was lost. She begins to understand that intimacy is not something guaranteed but something built and protected by both partners. In the space where he once stood, she now feels the emptiness of the connection she once had, the warmth she once felt, and the closeness she may not experience again in the same way. The consequences of unseen effort begin to reveal themselves slowly, often in moments she least expects, after a good man finally steps away. When he was present, his efforts blended into the rhythm of daily life so seamlessly that she rarely noticed how much energy he poured into keeping the relationship grounded. He was the one who fixed the small misunderstandings before they grew, who remembered the details that mattered to her, who adjusted himself to her moods in ways that made her feel understood. His effort lived in the quiet things, the gentle reminders, the emotional check-ins, the willingness to apologize first, the attempts to bring clarity when conflict threatened to pull them apart. But because these gestures were consistent, they became invisible, and invisibility often leads to underestimation. When he leaves, these once unseen efforts come into sharp focus. She begins to notice how conversations feel heavier without someone to steady them, how problems linger without someone stepping forward to resolve them, how the home feels different without the softness he added to it. She realizes how much he protected the relationship from drifting, how much he shielded her from emotional distance, and how often he stepped into the role of the emotional anchor without complaint. His effort wasn't loud, dramatic, or demanding. It was quiet devotion, the kind that usually goes unnoticed until it is no longer there to lean on. The consequences of taking this for granted become clearer with each passing day. She may find herself replaying moments when he tried to express his needs gently, only for those needs to be dismissed or minimized. She remembers times he voiced his exhaustion or asked for mutual effort, but because his strength appeared unwavering, she assumed he would always bounce back. Now, she begins to see that he wasn't invincible, he was simply committed. And commitment, when unreciprocated, eventually wears down even the most patient heart. His departure leaves her confronting an emotional reality she may not have acknowledged before. Relationships don't fall apart suddenly, they erode quietly when effort isn't recognized. She starts to see where she contributed to that erosion, where she ignored the subtle signs of his disappointment, where she relied on him to maintain harmony, where she failed to meet him halfway because his consistency made her believe he would keep holding on. In this reflection, the silence around her begins to feel heavier. It carries the weight of everything he once carried for both of them. She starts to understand that losing a good man is not just about losing love, it is about losing the emotional safety, the thoughtful gestures, the unspoken understanding, and the steady effort that made the relationship feel easy. And now, those consequences have become her reminders, teaching her that unseen effort is never effortless and that failing to value it often leads to the loss of the person who gave the most. The silence that follows the loss of a good man eventually transforms into something deeper than regret. It becomes an opportunity for growth, awakening, and self-reflection. At first, the quiet feels like a punishment, a lingering reminder of the love she once held but didn't protect. Yet as time moves forward, that silence shifts. It turns into a space where she can finally hear herself without distraction, where she can confront the emotional patterns she overlooked, and where she can begin to understand the choices that led her to this moment. Growth rarely happens in comfort, and the absence of someone who once offered unwavering stability forces her to look inward with a level of honesty she may have avoided before. She begins to examine not just what he did or didn't do, but what she contributed, neglected, or misunderstood within the relationship. This moment of awakening is uncomfortable because it highlights the gaps between who she believed she was and how she actually behaved when intimacy required reciprocity. She starts to see how her reactions were shaped by old wounds, fears, or expectations she never voiced. She begins to understand how her emotional defenses, once useful in protecting her, became barriers that pushed away the very person who tried to reach her most consistently. The silence becomes a classroom where she learns the importance of communication, the significance of empathy, and the necessity of showing up with the same effort she expected from him. She realizes that love is not sustained by desire alone, it is sustained by awareness, intention, and the willingness to nurture connection even when it feels vulnerable. This growth is not about chasing what she lost or idealizing the past. Instead, it becomes a turning point where she starts to rebuild herself from the inside out. She begins to question what she truly wants in a relationship and whether her actions aligned with those desires. She may recognize that she relied too heavily on his emotional strength or believed that his loyalty would compensate for her lack of emotional availability. Understanding these patterns allows her to step into a new version of herself, one who is capable of offering depth, clarity, and appreciation rather than expecting someone else to carry the emotional weight alone. As she moves through this process, the silence becomes less of a punishment and more of a guide. It teaches her to value patience, to recognize effort, and to honor emotional presence when it is offered. It encourages her to cultivate the parts of herself that were dormant, overlooked, or constrained by past habits. In this growth, she begins to reclaim her emotional maturity, learning that losing a good man doesn't define her, how she evolves afterward does.